Hey everybody, Mooch and Hoser here. You guys remember Hoser, right? The author of Fight Fight and also Silver Waterfall, his novel about the Battle of Midway. And also we have some exciting stuff happening with Hoser's DCS game. The new one's called Dominant Fury. And Hoser, when do we expect that one to be on the streets?
Hi, Mooch. This spring, and of course, in DCS world, 2 weeks.
Maintenance minutes. Yeah, so BD, he tweeted something, Baltic Dragon for DCS World tweeted something about the game today, that it's got some long missions, but you don't have to play them all at the same time. You can play them in segments and that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
we'll keep
they're getting the real thing, the real, you sit in the cockpit for 4 hours.
Yeah. So the game will have to come with piddle packs, I guess, and some other real world stuff. Right, but that's exciting. We're looking forward to that. So we wanted to launch the Alert Mooch live stream, as I tweeted and put in the community tab earlier today, based on a confluence of goings on around the world. And there's basically three prongs to this discussion. So let's just kind of tee it up, and everybody watching, if you guys, we're hawking the comments, and we'll throw you into the discussion. We very much want this to be a community discussion here. Remind everybody of the super chat feature that actually makes your comment brighter. So we're inclined to see that one as we're scrolling. But in any case, we don't just want this to be Hoser and me talking. We want you guys to be part of the discussion here. So please weigh in the chat. I see we already have almost 500 folks here. So this is awesome already. Actually, we've just exceeded 500. So this is fantastic. So three prongs. And I want to talk about China. I want to talk about Russia. And then the wild card here is this thing that happened with the Houthis and the UAE overnight, with this rebel group in Yemen lobbing missiles at Abu Dhabi. Because that's the kind of thing that can kind of light the tinder, if you use World War I as your analogy. So, but first, let's talk about China. So in recent days, there have been some Chinese fighters that have been operating off the coast of Taiwan. In fact, they lay this official from Taiwan tweeted here, 13 PLA jets entered Taiwan's southwest today, including 2 J-16Ds, which is kind of like the Chinese version of, I don't know, Jose, what would you say? It's kind of like a cross of a MiG-29 and a Sukhoi of some sort.
Yes, it's a Su-27 flanker variant. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this kind of activity is obviously beyond threatening, and so this has sort of been a slow build to our concerns about the Chinese designs on Taiwan and more broadly, the way they've been behaving in the South China Sea, so forth and so on. So that's part A. Okay, part B is what's been happening around the Ukraine. This is years in the making. Secretary of State Blinken has been on a European tour, sat down with his Russian counterpart a couple of days ago. And now, as a function of that, the breaking news is that we're mobilizing NATO forces, American forces, in and around Europe, because we have some indications that the Russians are ready to go. And we'll talk about this as we go along. And now the third prong of this discussion is what we'll call the wild card, and that's the Houthis. So overnight, they lobbed some missiles at Abu Dhabi, and UAE responded with THAAD missiles. If you're not familiar with the THAAD system, here's basically how, terminal high altitude area defense. It's like a Patriot missile. And it looks to be, in this case, that the THAAD missiles did the trick. I do not believe any of these missiles hit any buildings in Abu Dhabi. Of note, there was a European PGA Tour event in Abu Dhabi this weekend. I don't know if all the golfers, like whomever, were out of the country by then, but that would be pretty interesting if you're, a PGA Tour golfer and all of a sudden the hotel starts getting targeted by Houthi missiles. But so as we're saying, these three things together can kind of start to feel like, let's just call it roughly, and I don't want to use hyperbole here, the elements of World War III. And that's the theme for this live stream. So let's take each one of them individually. So with respect to China, Hoser, what is our order of battle there, particularly with respect to, I'll ask the Casper Weinberger question, where are the carriers? And in this case, what do our carriers have on them that might be of interest to the viewers?
Well, we have a significant portion of our 10 deployable aircraft carriers at sea deployed right now. In the Western Pacific, we have 3. Ronald Reagan is home ported in Japan. She may be at sea at the moment, don't know, but in the region, and we know always ready to get underway within hours' notice. But underway are Carl Vinson, which has been on deployment for some time, and Abraham Lincoln, which left on deployment earlier this month. Photos yesterday, lots of public affairs photos of the ships, steaming with the other ships in their respective strike groups, and 2 big deck amphibs, I believe Essex and America, with their embarked air wings, if you will. On the 2 carriers, each carrier has a squadron of F-35Cs, 1 Navy and 1 Marine Corps. The first Marine Corps deployment of the F-35C on Abraham Lincoln. Those ships are together in formation. Lots of photographs. This is obviously messaging. Hey, we're here, and we know what we're doing. Now, the United States has been here in the Western Pacific since the end of World War II. Certainly since the Korean conflict, our Navy has been forward deployed. So those are familiar waters. Of course, we know that the People's Republic has a different view, particularly of the South China Sea, which they believe is theirs from ancient times. And I'm sure many of your viewers are familiar with the 9-dash line, the arbitrary, blue territory that the People's Republic believes is theirs.
So we also have Reagan permanently forward deployed with Super Hornets aboard, both E's and F's. The F squadron is my old squadron, VFA 102, Diamondbacks. So that's some good capability. But while you say we have been forward deployed for years, which is absolutely true, we never left after World War II, basically. We haven't had this sort of next generation flight deck multiple firepower in theater like we do now. So it's probably no coincidence that these 2 carriers are cruising together. As viewers of the channel know, because we've talked about the capabilities of the F-35, and particularly in the episode about the Gerald Ford, the what does $13 billion get you episode, we noted that those 2 carriers are currently the only 2 that can operate the F-35C for any length of time. And that's a function of what's in the intermediate maintenance shop on the hangar bay and the jet blast deflector thickness kind of thing. So what is it that the F-35 brings to the fight? Obviously, stealth is a big deal. If you're going against, look at that Taiwanese representative's tweet about the J-16. Is that a fourth or fifth gen airplane? I guess probably an advanced fourth gen airplane.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
So let's just assume it's got long range forward quarter weapons, like that can rival the AIM-120. Not hypersonics, because that's a thing that we've been talking about that is of concern to a carrier strike group, is Chinese hypersonic development. And we've seen evidence they've been testing that, and they're, let's just say, getting close with some of that capability. And that's a game changer in terms of ranges and that sort of thing. It resets the calculus quite a bit with respect to how do we imagine these strike groups would operate in the event that the bubble went up on Taiwan. So the F-35, obviously stealth, obviously forward quarter capable.
Range.
Ranges is a plus or it has good range.
Yes, and as do the J-16, which is the two-seat flanker airframe, the J-11 single seat, the new J-20 fifth generation, tremendous range.
So we have capability in terms of power projection in theater. You've mentioned the amphibs, so those are chock full of Marines. I'm not sure what the status of any expeditionary Army units are in theater, but obviously they're just a C-17 ride away from places like Hawaii and wherever. So this is what our airborne forces do if the need arises. But the big question, Hoser, is do we think that if China invades Taiwan, that we will defend Taiwan?
We have treaty obligations to do just that. And it's going to be quite an undertaking to cross 80 miles of open ocean for an amphibious landing. Now, there might be other ways to invade. But it's still, there's going to be, to take Taiwan is not going to be easy. Is the Chinese military machine battle tested? Like the United States or even NATO nations? That's an open question. If they have a lot of great capability on paper, have they ever used it? So they have to. They'll make a decision, and I think that will the United States oppose that with a carrier strike group going toe to toe? I'm not sure. We have other assets though. I do believe that the United States is obligated to defend Taiwan and will do so.
Okay, so let's put a pin in this theater, and let's pivot to Ukraine. Breaking news, or overnight, it became known that we were, let's just say, mobilizing forces towards the northwestern border of Ukraine. And it starts to feel a lot like NATO, Soviet bloc kind of activity. Now, in recent decades, we've downsized our presence there from where it was 70s, 80s, height of the Cold War, because this wasn't the threat. As the Cold War ended and we were focused on Middle East and asymmetric threats, the idea of a conventional land force in Eastern Europe became prohibitively expensive, and we started to reduce our forces there. So now we've leaned more heavily on NATO doing their own defense, as it were. This is something that was a root note of the Trump administration was, A, pay your bills, and B, sort of focus on your own defense increasingly. So a little bit of research in terms of the NATO order of battle. For starters, the air piece, they have roughly 1,800 airplanes, tactical airplanes, in NATO, primary, and half of those are F-16s, and the other half are Eurofighters. And we have a American presence in where? Vincenza. Where else do we have Air Force airplanes?
In Germany.
Okay.
And there's Ramstein, Spangdahlem, tactical air bases, and we have airlift. United Kingdom, where we have Strike Eagles and bombers based at various bases there, and again an airlift tanker capability that I imagine is more than any other nation, and maybe equal to the rest of NATO combined.
So let's just call that a robust air capability.
And we have USS Carl Vinson is in the Mediterranean with her air wing.
Okay.
Did I say Carl Vinson? Please excuse me.
No, you mean Harry S. Truman.
Harry S. Truman. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Harry S. Truman is there on a routine deployment in the Med.
And so Harry S. Truman with Super Hornets. I'm not sure exactly what squadrons are in the air wing, but they don't have F-35s, but they do have Super Hornets. So bottom line, there's a lot of air power that could be brought to bear. So that introduces a discussion about if you're flying, doing close air support over Ukraine, you are in an S-400 and S-500, like most advanced Russian SAM envelopes. So do we have the suppression of enemy air defenses capability? Remember, let's remind everybody that the reason we stopped the sale of F-35s to Turkey was because they were also buying S-400s from Russia. And those two systems, I guess, let me just say they don't play nice together, or they play too nice together, where the S-400 can exploit some of the systems in the F-35, both with Intel back-end data fusion, but also the S-400 apparently doesn't care about stealth. So that's a big gaping hole in our ability to, have air supremacy over Ukraine.
I think it looks like these forces are amassed along three borders: Belarus, Russia, and forces probably coming up from Crimea and the Black Sea. The eastern half of Ukraine is most of the population, many ethnic Russians, sympathetic to Russia. This looks imminent. But first, there's the Ukrainian military, and their air force is former Soviet Su-27, MiG-29 aircraft that are capable, although they've been around for 20 plus years, and and they have some formidable ground forces. They're going to bloody the nose of anyone who invades. I believe they're ready for it. I think your question leads to, how will the United States support? Don't have an answer except that perhaps on the margins, with support, maybe airlift things that the Ukrainians need at the moment. It might come to combat forces engaged.
It might start with a no-fly zone, just like we did Libya, right? And again, some of that would demand an integrated air defense IAD rollback, right? So are we lobbing, anti-radiation missiles into sovereign Russia in order to have that no-fly zone? That's otherwise, I think we're just setting ourselves up for failure, because if you want to talk about rapid escalation, establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine and have somebody shot down, have an F-35 shot down or a Eurofighter shot down. Okay, now what? Your move, NATO, your move, President Biden. Not sure where that goes. So let's bring in one of the commenters here. And this is sort of a dramatic way to phrase it, but it's a fair question. Do we have any legit strategic interest in Ukraine, enough to spill American blood? And then there's a political statement: stop the endless wars that only serve the Raytheons, Lockheed Martin, et cetera. So the question is, the first part of the question is, well, I guess the question, the second part's an editorial comment, but is fair. So what do we think about our obligation to Ukraine? Now, we knew at one time Ukraine was thinking about joining NATO. This was some years ago. I think that offer was taken off the table because it was kind of rife with provocation. So I don't think that's in the cards anymore. But what do we think prima facie are our America, US/NATO's obligation is to Ukraine?
It is a fair question, the first part. And 30 years ago, when the Soviet Union dissolved, Ukraine was full of nuclear weapons. And the United States says, look, okay, if you let us destroy those weapons, then we promise that we if Russia were ever to attack you, we'll come to your aid. And the Russians said, yeah, you go ahead, destroy them. We don't want them back. We're good. Well, 30 years have passed, and Ukraine is absolutely strategic to Russia. I mean, it was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, great rich farmland, the access to the Black Sea. Current pipelines run through Ukraine into Poland that supplied Europe with oil, and the Ukrainians in past years were trying to get a tariff on those pipeline on that oil, which upset Russia, I believe, and now they're acting. I think, would we get involved? Would the United States, NATO get involved? We promised that we would. Do we have a strategic interest? Maybe not, except that, do we want this type of aggression to go ignored in Europe? Would we be asking for more of it? And there's plenty of other countries along the Baltics that are watching this very closely. One last thing is, to join NATO, your borders have to be secure or stable. I should say stable. And Ukraine's borders are certainly not stable.
So let me talk about the Houthi situation real quick. And as I do that, why don't you hawk the comments here? We have quite a bit of chat going on, which is awesome. We're going to bring you guys in, promise. So as we said before, Houthis, so this, like a lot of things in the Middle East, comes down to Shia, Sunni. The Houthis are a Shiite movement, Zadi Shiite, which is a sort of subset of Shiite movement, apparently backed by the Iranians. And so they very much have a problem with westernized Arab states. And the UAE is very westernized, as anybody who's ever been to Dubai, like Hoser and I have been, and Abu Dhabi. These are very modern, cosmopolitan centers of international commerce, Grand Prix racing. As I just mentioned, there's a PGA golf tournament. Ferrari has a massive headquarters in Abu Dhabi. And when you talk to fundamentalist Muslim extremist groups like the Houthis, that is not cool with them. So they're going to do whatever they can to provoke the world, really. We will remind everybody that the Houthis also shot at an Arleigh Burke class destroyer in 2016, the USS Mason. And fortunately, the missile fell short because, quite frankly, the Mason was not ready to do self-defense when this happened. And that was a big wake-up call to the surface Navy that was in the littorals of Yemen at that time. So the point is the Houthis are capable of, stirring things up. So not unlike what started World War I with this series of treaties, and you have this random X factor in Sarajevo with Franz Ferdinand shooting the Archduke there, and lights off the war, something like this unseen event can cause the whole thing to go up in a way where it's this domino effect. So the other thing that we want to ask about is, what's the relationship with respect to punking the United States between Russia and China? To what degree is this all about that?
Both of those countries have an interest in tweaking the nose of the West, certainly led by the United States. And they, whatever bad happens to the West is good for them. So I could see them working together. But in the long term, Siberia is a lot of open expanse, and it's rich in minerals, and there's not many people that live there.
So here's a question from Libra 7.
Yes.
Curious who will have air superiority over Ukraine and which countries will get involved. Well, we sort of talked about some of that already. But this would be, if we're talking full up air-to-air warfare, this is because let's remember that we've had kind of air superiority, local air superiority since 9/11, right? We haven't, Taliban didn't have an air force. Any of the other, the Serbians had an air force, but it really wasn't very robust. So since Desert Storm 1, let's just say, we haven't had to deal with a peer air threat. And in this case, we very much would on both fronts, China, as we've already articulated, and Russia. So, fourth gen against fourth gen, fifth gen could be neutralized with the presence of S-400s, so we would find out in short order what that $1.2 trillion of the F-35 program got us, not just us, but NATO as well, because as you pointed out, UK has the F-35s and they would certainly be forward deployed. If they're not there already, I don't know if they're in Vincenzo already or Joy de Colle or wherever else they might be. But, this is something where the pitch is stealth. And then you say that except S-400, S-500, you're like, oops, okay, now what? So now it's like, okay, Growlers, what other seed assets do we have besides the Growler? Is that it?
As far as airborne electronic attack,
yeah,
that's pretty much it.
I mean, that's something the Air Force gave up on a while ago, ever since they got rid of the Raven.
Right. And right? they have specialized squadrons of F-16s, CJs that do the SEAD, what we used to call SEAD mission. You look at that theater though, and the question is, who's going to have air superiority? The Russian military has been in combat in Syria, for years now, and so they have some combat experience, and just to get aircraft airborne, loaded with the right load is something, and I have no doubt that they're a hardened Air Force. Ukraine has, I think maybe 2 squadrons of each type of fighter in their Air Force. But we know how that's going to end, I believe, but it's just a question of how much attrition will occur. I'm going through these some of these questions, and understandably, there's a lot of emotion. No one wants this, and certainly I'm Mooch and I don't. But we're talking about it realistically. Here's a situation. We don't like the situation, but here it is, and we can analyze it. Another question is, who are you guys to say, okay, we're both 2 retired guys, and and we can talk about this stuff, and we can both hope that people in the United States Defense and State Departments, say what you will, depending on them to do the right thing here.
Well, and plus, we're not representing that we're experts. We're just having the conversation.
Right.
We have some background that may allow us a measure of expertise when we're talking about air orders of battle, particularly. But this is just a forum to have the conversation with you guys, right? It's been a while since I've done a live stream. This is the biggest audience I've ever had in a live stream, which is fantastic. So Frank says, I thought the Cold War was over. Apparently nobody told Premier Putin. All right, so let's talk about Premier Putin. At once, he's got a number of his hierarchy of needs, let's just say, it varies from moment to moment. So he's got some domestic things that he's dealing with. The ruble's value has gone down in recent weeks by at least 10% and falling. Inflation is what? It's upwards of 20%, I think. No, it's running at 8.4%. What is our inflation right now? 3%, right? And we're complaining about that.
I've heard higher, but yeah.
And that's double the Central Bank of Moscow's 4% target. So the question with that predicate is, does this tension, does the potential for this conflict help financial markets or make it worse? Because I've read on the one hand that this is making it worse and he needs to knock it off. And of course, there's always the wag the dog, change the conversation thing that mostly cynics throw out, although there is historical precedent for this. You know, if you're under fire domestically, start a war, and that kind of unites the country when you have a common enemy out of nowhere. So Frank's comment is interesting and maybe not that far off, really.
Yes. And, war is politics by other means, according to von Clausewitz. And again, many of the questions are political in nature, and they're valid points. The politicians will deal with this one way or the other. When the military is called upon, they'll execute. And
and in terms of China's domestic situation, Xi handled the first wave, ironically and maddeningly, handled the first wave of COVID correctly with respect to global trade and global markets, and kind of actually China thrived in that first year and a half with the lockdown. They were able to be productive in the lockdown. But now what critics are saying is that same playbook doesn't work with this third wave of COVID, Omicron, where it's kind of impervious to the lockdown. And that's not a good strategy. So financial predictors are saying that this is going to be a bad year in terms of global trade and global markets for China with the way that Xi is currently postured. So does provoking Taiwan distract his populace in a way he is desirable for the Chinese Communist Party, or does it make it worse?
And I'm, who knows what the Chinese people know, but I imagine they know enough that there's tensions in the Taiwan Strait. There's also the Winter Olympics, and they're going to happen next month. We all know that. And the Sochi Olympics in 2014, and then a few months later there was the annexation of Crimea. So to be ready, to be prepared as the Olympics end for anything is a good stance, and it appears that certainly with naval forces, which are free to go anywhere outside 12 miles, we see that now.
So Michael says it's just Ukraine. No, the. I don't remember anybody saying the Ukraine, but if we did, we apologize. Of course, it's just Ukraine. Ted says, save Taiwan, leave Ukraine, no war with Russia. Ted Stryker. We've all seen his movie.
All right.
Good movie, yeah. Skeptical Observer says, NATO mobilization is a joke. It's all for theater. Biden and his morons have given Russia a go. Okay, I guess I don't want to get political here with respect to that sort of thing, but I would have, so what I've heard from folks serving in the Pentagon is, let's just say the focus with this administration is not on national defense, right? It's Build Back Better, it's infrastructure, it's some of the other things. And however, what I think I'm seeing now, and maybe this is just saber-rattling and maybe it's just tough guy talk, and we will see, maybe we'll see when push comes to shove here, in some cases literally, particularly with what the Secretary of State has said in recent days, a willingness to fight if it comes to that, right? It doesn't look like, and maybe this stance is just to try to back down both the Russians and the Chinese. So like everybody on this thread, we all have our doubts about just how ready this administration might be in the face of these threats. And again, I don't want to be political about it. I just want to deal with facts. But as Hoser and I have said, our feeling is if the Chinese or the Russians step off the line of departure, there will be a reaction. Because in some cases, there are pundits who are saying, in fact, let me bring up a couple other tweets of some thought leaders here. So Justin Amash, who was a representative from Michigan and a presidential candidate for about 5 minutes last go around, says any effort by the president to enter U.S. troops into hostilities in Eastern Europe without congressional authorization would be unconstitutional, illegal, and undemocratic, depriving Americans of their right to be represented regarding whether their loved ones are sent to war. Okay, so this is like always what comes up. However, remind me, Hoser, we still have the War Powers Act, right? That's the president can send troops without going to Congress for approval for 100 days.
Right.
So
and presidents do that, and presidents pay a political price, good or other, and they'll have to answer for that down the road. Yeah.
So I used to play politics on Twitter, and I've ceased that. But let me just say that completely caving, like doing the rope-a-dope on either Ukraine or China or Taiwan, rather, to your point, is a bad strategy. That's
right.
There's no other. It's not like give them that and then establish a front somewhere else. And that's kind of what, here's Tom Nichols, who I like a lot, and I respect Tom. And, he teaches, he's about to stop teaching, but he teaches at the Naval War College. And so he says, if Putin has been on war, there's not much we can do. Oh, okay, is that true? Make sure we prepare it as best as we can. It'll be time for quiet resolve rather than rash reaction. So I don't know and I read this Atlantic article, and this Atlantic article kind of talks about, and I'm paraphrasing, I recommend everybody read this article, but it kind of talks about what we're talking about, which is just give them that first thing. Throw that piece of clothing at the grizzly that's charging, and then reestablish your defense somewhere else. I don't think that works either with Taiwan or with Ukraine, because all you've done, I believe, is embolden an enemy that's a foe on the world stage that's bent on, in some cases, recapturing its place in the world order. There's a lot of resentment to America in recent decades that we haven't done a lot to tamp down necessarily. Not that we have to do that. That's not our job. We're just being us. But in the process, there are other folks who want a seat at that table. And this is why we have strong national defense and why we've always been sort of focused on a strong national defense. This is why our defense budget is what it is. I think the last NDAA that just got passed was what, $725 billion thereabouts, which is the combined budgets of all of the other NATO partners and then some, right? But for that you get a capability, and for that capability you get our position in the world. And so I don't think caving is a good answer in either of these fronts. Further, if I'm reading the tea leaves right, I don't think that is what we would do. For all of our sense that this administration is relatively weak with respect to our focus on defense and recapitalizing the force. And why do people think that? Well, I guess the Afghan pullout didn't help a whole lot with respect to that. And statements made at the most recent press conference by President Biden about, yeah, I'd do it all over again if I had to, right? It's kind of like, really? Is that true? Because you're kind of ignoring sort of what happened in some ways. And that's a signal to the bad actors that is maybe not intended, but the resonant effects of those sorts of statements can come back to haunt us. And so maybe the national defense folks figured that out in a hurry, and the Secretary of State figured that out in a hurry. And so our posture is now, look, we can't appear weak on the world stage, and we can't appear impassive or even neutral on the world stage. So go ahead, Jose.
In the Western Pacific, we are engaged. Again, I mean, we have 1/3 of our strike group force is there right now, and there's probably more military force there. A significant portion of our national power. That's an air-sea scenario. Boots on the ground are not envisioned, I believe. And the same thing with Ukraine. I don't see the 82nd Airborne. I don't see armored divisions, which require weeks and months of sea lift to
so that's an answer to Montana's question here.
To jump
right?
off there. Yeah.
Do you think the 82nd Airborne?
87. I didn't even read it. I don't see it. I think there's other ways the United States can assist if this becomes hot without employing Army forces.
So here's another fair question from John. So when are the Japanese and Koreans going to start footing the bill for their own defense? So with respect to the Japanese, I believe they have started, right? I mean, they're doing some stuff that is I don't know if it's a violation of what's the name of the National Defense Act, or this is something MacArthur created in the wake of World War II.
So it's the 1,000-mile, border around their home shores. They can't go outside 1,000. I think that's passed.
So I think those restrictions on their defense growth are going away, and I think the Japanese are fully willing to do whatever it is they need to do. And so I think some of those guardrails are coming off.
And to include the nuclear guardrail, we could see this decade Japan go nuclear.
Okay. And with respect to Korea, I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, we've had a robust presence, Clark Air Force Base, other things in South Korea since the Korean War, the 38th parallel. Our presence there has, been part of what's existed since the Korean War.
Deterrence, kept the peace.
Deterrence, right? And in many ways that, you always see presidents at the border looking over at the North Korean soldiers on the other border, looking steely-eyed back at us. It's a metaphor for freedom versus communism. But that's an expensive proposition. And certainly in the last 4 years, there was some sense that their could be discussions, and the North Korean leader Kim was a guy who was willing to, come off of that hard stance. I don't know how that netted out ultimately, or where we are now with that, with respect to their ICBM threat. They certainly continue to test that capability. And I don't think we're seeing anything that would suggest that they're ready to be, a trading partner and a reasonable actor on the world stage among a community of reasonable nations. But that doesn't answer John's question about what is South Korea doing particularly to see their own defense. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
I think that South Korea has a robust armed force for what South Korea can do. I don't believe they have an expeditionary armed force, but I think they're going to defend their interests, and they're in nearshore waters.
So KS says Japan and Korea do foot the bill. They have better militaries than almost every nation in Europe. Interesting.
We have a strike group in Japan, and of course we have air and marine forces. And that's certainly as Germany has a form of support. So
is this breaking news, Hoser? Have you heard about?
I have not.
Tortora Porco, thanks for the super chat for starters. TTP. I was not. Is this like just now happened? Landing mishap on Carl Vinson, South China Sea, pilot ejected. Okay, so that's breaking news, I believe. So there's been a charge that Trojan alum, I guess that USC alum, military is too busy being woke rather than an effective fighting force. I know that this has been a charge on the U.S. military currently. Again, to stay out of politics, I will just say that the readiness data does not support that assertion. Hoser and I both know guys like Admiral Aquilino, who's in charge of Indo-PACOM, and Papa, who's in charge of the Pacific Fleet, Tomcat, Super Hornet guy. And we talked to these guys at Hook most recently, and there's no sense that what your charge is true with respect to our ability to fight the nation's wars. However, until the bubble goes up, we don't know, do we?
Right? There's Washington, and there's the fleet in the field, and the way it works is that the Secretary of Defense contacts Admiral Aquilino, as Moosh used in that example, and that is the direct line chain of command. Chris Aquilino, Pappy Paparo, Mooch and I know both of them, and they're both fighting men, and I have full confidence, as I'm sure Mooch does, in both of them, leading their commands.
Yeah, I don't want to be one of those old guys that throws stones at those who currently have their hand on the tiller. So I reject the woke readiness notion. However, I also would admit that until we actually start having kinetic activity, we don't exactly know. So here's another interesting observation from Skeptical Observer. Chinese Communist Party ship hunting ballistic missiles make our carriers useless. Would you risk a carrier in a heavy ballistic missile threat zone? The answer is, of course we would. This is what carriers do, right? Now, in fact, Hoser and I were talking about this before we came on air. If you're talking about hypersonic Mach 5 long-range missiles make our carriers useless, then that's a different discussion. But currently, with the sea order of battle, air order of battle, our carrier strike groups are not useless. We actually have greater stick length with their current order of battle. Now, we are very concerned about what's happening with hypersonics. And that will change the calculus with respect to how far does an aircraft carrier particularly have to stand off. And that kind of affects the tanking plan and where are the heavy tankers and what's the transit time and these kinds of things. But currently, we enjoy an advantage with respect to what you're saying there. The other thing that we need to talk about is numbers versus capability. So on paper, the Chinese have the biggest Navy in the world. But capabilities wise, Americans believe that we have an advantage. When you start talking about fifth generation capability in the form of an F-35C, when you talk about our submarines that are forward deployed, when you talk about what does the MU and our ARG bring to the equation with respect to both power projection, because now with an F-35B on an amphib, you have power projection capability you never had with a Harrier, and you got V-22s twice as fast as an H-46. You have some striking capability that is over and above what any potential enemy has. The question is, when you start getting into a shooting war and you start having attrition, how deep is that bench, right, Hoser? So we said we have currently 2 F-35 squadrons. X equals 24 airplanes, assuming they're all up. And oh, by the way, the FMC rate of the F-35 is not 100%, right? It's more like 50%. So if those start getting gunned, never mind shot down, but if they start getting gunned because bullets don't know what stealth is, how long does the war last? I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah. And it's so easy for people like us. Well, it'll be quick. And history shows that these things have a tendency to go on. You're right. I mean, who can reach back and bring more assets to theater fastest? Who has a repair capability that's not at risk? So, but the question is, carriers are sitting ducks, they're anachronisms, and we got to get. But we are still using these ships, and they are needed. They are requested. I wrote.
Yeah, this is the wrong channel. Let's just say this is the wrong channel to say that carriers are useless.
Yeah.
Let me just start there.
I wrote about that in this novel here, Fight about, we're talking about, you have to detect, track, target, and then actually hit a carrier that doesn't want you to do those things. It is not easy to do. And our enemies know this, and they're working 24/7 to find ways to do it. But we have some defensive capability, and it's not as if you're in a DF-26 envelope, it's not that's not the end of you, I assure you.
So David asked, was there any specific topic mentioned that encouraged Blinken to recommend such a response? So I think what David's wondering is, where did we pivot from sort of a wait and see to, okay, now we're going to start to mobilize NATO forces and kind of position ourselves at the border. I'm just thinking that the answer, David, is probably his interface with his Russian counterpart. You could see the body language in the handshake was, let's just say, not warm. And maybe that's where Blinken was playing for his boss, as a counter to the Helsinki summit, where it was a little bit too warm, to be cryptic about it. So I don't know. I just think this is just the way it's sort of trending, based on what we're hearing from Russia, based on what Russia is doing with respect to not backing down on the border. Again, the prognosticators are saying that while they don't believe that Putin would do an all-out war, and this is in that Atlantic article. Again, I recommend everybody read that Atlantic article. While he wouldn't do an all-out invasion, he would do surgical incursions just to provoke, and so this is just a way to up the ante. If I do this, what do you do, right? Yes. If I do something short of where I've completely forced your hand on the international stage, this is where it gets tougher for the Biden administration and for NATO, quite frankly, to figure out, where are we with, the new Germany just turned over their leadership. And there's some sense that the new chancellor is not as hard line as Merkel was with respect to these things. So in fact, the Germans didn't allow overflight most recently of some missions that were transiting, which was kind of like what Spain pulled way back in El Dorado Canyon. That doesn't make the Western world very happy when a NATO partner isn't on board for the big win. But everybody's dealing with their domestic situation. And, this is where you got to sort of factor in all the moving parts.
Hey, Mooch, I saw a question in here, and please, questioner, forgive me, I missed your name, but the question was, along the lines of, why don't we send a naval presence in the Black Sea? Or maybe the question was, what do you think about sending naval presence to the Black Sea? And this gets to your, you used the word, provoke earlier. Is the United States and any naval country free to operate in the Black Sea? And the answer is yes. But do we want to do that right now? I'm not sure. There's a reason for a U.S. Navy warship to be in the Black Sea right now. Maybe there is one. I don't know the answer to that, but I would hope that that might just be too much provocation. The United States will send a destroyer into the Black Sea and kind of go around and just be there. Maybe the fact that we can doesn't always mean we should.
Roger that. Discretion is the whatever we say about that is the highest form of valor, or that kind of thing. Yeah. So here's a TV timeout. I'm putting a link in the chat. So we just, in fact, today, Amazon just launched Kindles of Punk's Wing and Punk's Fight. So if you've been waiting for the digital version of those two books to join the Kindle of Punk's War, they are now available. The other thing that people have been asking about on the channel is, when are the audiobooks coming out? We have an answer. So we have signed a deal with Blackstone Publishing, which does audiobooks. I am not reading the books. I tried. It's, in fact, Punk's Fight is 13 hours long, it turns out, right? So I tried it. So let's just say there are professionals that are going to do this. In fact, they have to audition for us. It's kind of cool, right? But the short answer is April 28th, Punk's War comes out as an audiobook. May 31st, so I think that's Memorial Day weekend, right? Punk's Wing comes out, and then June 26th, Punk's Fight comes out. So there you go. They are available up Amazon for pre-order. And so very excited that we have Kindle versions of all three of the trilogy now at long last. And we're going to have audiobooks by the time we get to the spring. So more to follow as these things unfold. We'll have discounts. Don't forget, and I'll put this in the chat, Punk YT, as I say at the end of every episode, is your discount code at usni.org for the Punk's trilogy. Also, don't forget, you can get the series bundle in hardback. And the press just told me that they only have 130 copies of the bundle left. And when they're gone, they're gone. So there's the link for the bundle. Hardback versions, special edition versions, all signed. You get them signed. And so there we go. So we're coming up on an hour here, Hoser. In sum, I think we've kind of sort of laid the landscape again. Two conventional fights with an asymmetric accelerant in the form of what happened around the Houthis. We can expect that a nation state like Iran will prop up proxies to create chaos, particularly in the Middle East. And that kind of activity, shutting down the Suez Canal, Strait of Hormuz, making it tough for tourism in a place like Dubai or Abu Dhabi. This can cause a resonant reaction that will accelerate the tensions in a place like China or Ukraine. And so that's where we get this idea that this is how world wars can happen. Are we saying this is imminent? No, we are not. But recommendation to everybody is watch where the carriers go. And there are a variety of great sources for that. US&I News does a thing called the Fleet Tracker every week, where they'll show you exactly where the carrier battle groups are, where the ARGs are, the amphibious ready groups. And with any one of them is a number of small boys, and subs are always an X factor in there. You know, our subs have got great offensive capability, as well as the ability to defend the aircraft carrier. So that's the other thing when you start talking about the Chinese ability to reach out and touch our aircraft carriers. Do not leave out the submarines. And please tell me if you know where they are, because I guarantee you don't, any more than the Chinese know where they are, and the Chinese don't know where they are. And when you talk about the Black Sea, Hoser, don't forget that you've probably got submarines in the Black Sea as well. I don't say this with any authority, but that's your silent service and go wherever they want with relative impunity. So
those guys are on their own program. Yes,
absolutely. So great session. Thanks everybody for showing up. Apologize if we didn't get to your comment. Now, when we finish up here, this will be a live episode on my channel. So this chat will be there in perpetuity. So thank you for putting your comments in there. They will be seen. And then as we go forward, you can comment on this episode like we do regularly. So thanks, everybody. This is the first time I've done a live stream in some time. This is the best participation. I'm going to sort of credit Hoser with that. People heard it's Hoser. It's sort of like the warm-up band is better than the headliner. That's good stuff. So Hoser, my good friend, my favorite LSO, thank you for assisting me with commentary and moderating this live stream.
It's great to be with you, Mooch, and thanks for tackling this multi-domain subject. Not my pleasure, but I feel like it's something that we got to talk about from time to time. So we'll do this again when the need arises. Upcoming episodes this week, everybody. I'm going to talk to, as you guys saw, we're going to talk to Admiral Flatley about him landing a C-130 on the Forstall back in 1963. I'm also going to talk to my good friend Scott Kelly, who was my pilot in VF-143 when Hoser was CAG Paddles. We're going to talk about us flying together, because somebody said in a comment, hey, why don't you talk to one of your old pilots? I'm like, okay, I'll bring on Scott Kelly, who also had 340 days aboard the International Space Station and trained with the Russian space program. So look for that. That episode will probably go live on Thursday. So a lot of cool stuff happening. Thanks everybody for the super chat consideration. Thank you for your support with being here and with subscribing. Channel growth continues. It's very exciting. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up. So look for more in the near future. All right, Hoser, thank you once again. And we'll see you guys later.